Hello friends and neighbors. Well, a couple of months ago I reviewed a graphic novel by Art Spiegelman called Mouse, A Survivor's Tale. More specifically, I reviewed Part 1, My Father Bleeds History, and now I have gotten a hold of Part 2, and here my troubles began, and I will be reviewing it today. First of all, I would be remiss if I did not thank Book 5204, also known as my girlfriend, and by the way, she pointed out that I do like to point out that she's my girlfriend, and yes, I do like to point out that she's my girlfriend, but at any rate, she purchased this book and I greatly appreciate it. Diagram that sentence. When we last left the Spiegelmans at the end of Part 1, Vladek had just gotten to the point in his story where he had become captured and sent to Auschwitz. Part 2 picks up the story sometime later. Vladek and his new wife Mala had gone on a vacation somewhere where they have a cabin, but Mala had finally become fed up with Vladek's miserly and stubborn attitudes and left him. In a panic, Vladek calls Art and he and his wife come to stay with him and take care of him for a little while. So we continue to see the tense relationship between Art and his father as they try to deal with his attitudes that were, by and large, brought along by his time in Auschwitz. Now, in my review of Part 1, I mentioned that there were two things that made that particular story about World War II stand out. The first was the drawing style, specifically the fact that all the human characters have animal heads. Mice for the Jews, cats for the Nazis, and so on. That drawing style continues in this part and is actually expanded upon a bit. There are a couple of instances where we see that the characters in the story are actually aware not only that they have the animal heads, but that the animal heads are merely symbolic. Like at the beginning of the story, we see Art Spiegelman, the Art Spiegelman within the story, actually sitting trying to figure out how he's going to tell the story that he is in. Specifically, how is he going to draw his wife? Should he draw his wife as a mouse, or should he draw her as a frog since she's from France? So yeah, it's one of those things that gets a little trippy when you think about it too hard. And there's also a section of the novel where we break outside of both frame stories. And we see Art Spiegelman, the author, after his father has passed away, and we see in this case that instead of having animal heads, the characters in that part of the story are actually wearing masks over clearly human faces. Which you could take one of two ways. You could take it as we've moved outside of the frame story and this is the real Art Spiegelman, he's just wearing the mouse mask, or you could take it as the symbolism is starting to wear thin and is now you can see the string holding the mask onto the face. Either way, it's pretty cool. And of course the second part is the story within a story, which we've already talked about a little bit with regards to the drawing style. Remember, this is not just the story of Vladek's time in Auschwitz, although that is, by and large, the main vehicle for the book. This is also the story of Vladek's son, Art Spiegelman, also the author, trying to understand his father through this story. So he's trying to understand his father, he's trying to understand history, he's trying to understand the horrific events that occurred and what kind of effect they had on the survivors. And this is really hard for people who didn't live through that time to come to terms with, and so we see that generational gap between son and father. And like I said, this part of the story breaks the fourth wall even more than the first part did. The first part really didn't break it at all. Like, we were never really aware that we were in a story, we were never aware of the animal heads. But in Part 2, we really break that fourth wall and become fully aware that Art Spiegelman is telling us a story, and that the Art Spiegelman within the story is the Art Spiegelman, the author. It's not as confusing as it sounds. And as you'd expect, because it's actually telling about the time in the concentration camps, the imagery is a lot more graphic and a lot more disturbing at times. But I think it really brings the reality of the whole thing home, despite the fact that it's drawn in a very cartoony style. And Art Spiegelman is able to depict really graphic and disturbing images, despite the fact that this is basically a comic strip, at least in its style. And there are a lot of issues, particularly the issues in the present day, that aren't really resolved. Like, we never really see a resolution between Art and his father, and we never really see a resolution between a lot of the characters and a lot of the issues, but I think that's to serve to tell us that sometimes these issues just aren't going to be resolved. The message of this part of the story is very much the same as the message in the first part of the story. It is very important that we get the stories and the history from the people who actually lived it. And it's especially important that we sit and listen to the stories of the older generation while they are still alive to tell them. That point, at least, is definitely driven home in this part of the novel. I still think that this is an excellent story. Both parts 1 and 2 are definitely worth reading, particularly if you are interested in World War II history or the place of history in general. And my worth meter rating on Part 2 is the same as my worth meter rating on Part 1, worth owning new. Both of these parts are worth owning new. Go and get them and read them. You won't be disappointed. And that does it for this book review. Until next time, this is Matt Guyon reminding you not to stand on a spinny chair unless you want broken bones.